This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. You want to get smart, fast, without getting totally bogged down? We get it. This is the deep dive. We take complex stuff, boil it down to what you really need to know. No homework feel, promise.
And today, we're jumping right into something pretty significant in Canadian politics. Excerpts from the federal leadership debate back on April 17th, 2025.
That's right. We've done the sifting, pulled out the key moments, what the leaders actually said, and maybe what their underlying thinking is.
Think of it as your sort of personal guide through the noise.
Exactly. Your shortcut to getting what went down and, well, why it matters. Okay, let's dive in. The debate kicked off with a really direct question aimed at Mr. Carney.
Oh yeah, about Canada-U.S. relations, referencing his own statement that the relationship was, quote, over as we know it.
I mean, that's a pretty bold way to start things off, isn't it? A big statement.
It really is. And what was interesting right away was how Mr. Carney tried to frame that. He talked about Canada needing to, steer its own economic destiny.
Focusing inward.
Yeah, internal growth, but also looking beyond the U.S. for trade partners. And he floated the idea of counter tariffs, suggesting maybe a more confrontational stance if needed.
And Mr. Poilievre, he jumped on that part, didn't he? Agreed on the counter tariffs, really emphasizing Canadian sovereignty.
He did. It also seemed like a point of agreement there, at least on the surface, standing up to the U.S.
Right, talking tough. But does that always translate?
Well, that's the tension, isn't it? Because the debate did hint at the potential pain of those, dollar-for-dollar tariffs, the impact on actual Canadian jobs.
Yeah, and Carney, just a month into being PM, was already feeling that pressure.
No honeymoon period there.
Apparently not. Now, Mr. Singh, he came at it from a different angle, more about fundamental distrust of the U.S., especially on things like the Arctic and defense policy.
His argument seemed to be for less dependence overall, a more independent path for Canada.
Which raises that core question, how close should Canada be to the U.S.? Singh seems to think maybe our interests don't always align.
A more cautious approach, definitely. His perspective suggests, well, sometimes Canadian interests might just diverge.
And then you had Monsieur Blanchet bringing in the Quebec angle.
Right, focusing on being a reliable partner in negotiations, but specifically to protect Quebec's economic interests. Always that regional factor.
It's a constant reminder, isn't it?
Absolutely. So stepping back, that first exchange really laid out the challenge, navigating this massive relationship. Carney on economic independence, Poilievre on sovereignty, Singh pushing for less reliance, Blanchet protecting Quebec's stake.
It's complex, not just one issue.
Definitely multifaceted.
Oh, okay. Then the conversation got more specific. Mr. Poilievre brought up this anti-pipeline law, remember?
Yeah, arguing it basically gave the U.S. a monopoly on Canadian exports. A direct hit, really.
Accusing the government of undermining Canada's own economic leverage.
And what's interesting there is how the energy perspectives diverge. The Liberals under Carney had overseen some pipeline development.
But Singh shifted it.
Right, he talks about a bigger picture, an east-west energy grid. Affordable energy across Canada. It's a different frame than just export pipelines.
Thinking about national energy security, maybe.
Could be. Meanwhile, Monsieur Blanchet stuck to Quebec's line. Opposition to pipelines in Quebec, regardless of opinion elsewhere.
Highlighting their own environmental reviews, provincial autonomy.
Exactly. And they briefly touched on that looming threat, too, potential U.S. tariffs on critical minerals. Another vulnerability.
Always something on the horizon with trade. Okay, let's switch gears. Housing affordability. Huge issue.
Massive. And Mr. Singh came out swinging, framing it around corporate power, pointing at price gouging by big companies, especially for food costs.
Connecting affordability struggles to a broader economic inequality.
Exactly. Mr. Carney, though, his focus was very much on supply. Build, build, build.
Like rates not seen since World War II, he said?
Yeah, boost financing for developers, cut development charges, all about increasing the sheer number of homes.
But Mr. Poilievre immediately jumped on that, didn't he?
Oh, yes. He basically said, we've heard this before from the Liberals, pointing out that housing costs doubled under their watch, trying to tie Carney to past performance.
Or lack thereof, in his view.
Right. So you see the different diagnoses, right? Singh, corporate greed, Carney, lack of supply. Poilievre, Bad government policy.
And for people listening, it's like, which one resonates most with your own experience?
That's the question. Singh also got personal, attacking Carney's record related to Brookfield investments.
Accusing them of buying affordable housing and jacking up rents, that's pointed.
Very pointed. It's questioning Carney's credibility, suggesting his background might not align with the needs of people struggling.
And Poilievre's solution.
Classic conservative playbook. Cut taxes on building, get government out of the way, market-based.
Did Carney address the truly affordable end of the market initially?
Well, that was a critique, actually. His initial focus seemed more on, the middle to upper range. He did talk later about catalyzing private investment for affordability, but the initial emphasis was noted.
Okay, broadening out from just housing to the general cost of living. What were the proposals there?
Yet Mr. Singh offered some concrete things, like taking the GST off home heating, internet, cell bills, direct relief.
Things people see on their bills every month.
Exactly. Mr. Poilievre, again, focused on the previous government's record housing costs doubled, was his main point, implying change at the top is the answer.
And Mr. Carney?
He brought in the external factor, the risk Donald Trump poses to the economy, to affordability. And he stressed preserving social programs, the safety net.
So, framing himself as the steady hand against outside shocks.
Kind of. So again, different frames. Singh with direct relief, Poilievre blaming the past, Carney highlighting external risks and stability.
Different narratives for different voters. Okay, let's shift to crime and public safety.
Right. Missy Blanchet started that segment, raising the issue of border management, asylum seekers, a key concern, especially in Quebec.
And Mr. Poilievre immediately went for a tough on crime stance.
Very much so. Advocating for a 3 strikes law for repeat offenders and blaming what he termed liberal soft-on-crime policies.
How did Mr. Carney respond to that?
His emphasis was different. He talked about defending fundamental rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, suggesting perhaps a more rights-focused approach to justice.
So punishment versus rights, a fundamental split there.
A core ideological divide, yeah. And Blanchet's border concern as another layer. He also brought up the notwithstanding clause.
Ah, the override clause. Always controversial.
Always. Mr. Singh tried to find common ground, saying everyone agrees on severe penalties for horrible crimes, but then pivoted to prevention.
Focusing on root causes.
And he also took a shot at the conservatives, pointing out alleged cuts to border officers while calling for stronger borders. A perceived contradiction.
Poilievre kept hammering the bail system, right? Build C-75.
Yeah, describing chaos from catch-and-release bail laws. Very strong language.
And Carney's specific crime proposals.
More targeted, it seemed. Increased penalties for gang crime involving guns, and reverse onus for bail in those specific cases.
The discussion also touched on parental anxieties.
Blanchet mentioned that.
Illegal guns versus hunting rifles.
Poilievre's point.
And protecting community spaces like places of worship.
Carney emphasized that. So public safety is clear as a big worry, but the approaches offered were quite distinct.
And Blanchet threw in that reminder about relying on the U.S. for defense.
A sobering point.
Okay, next major theme, energy and climate change.
Mr. Singh kicked this off by talking about the real-world impacts of forest fires, extreme weather, framing it as an urgent need to protect the future, very climate crisis-focused.
Whereas Mr. Poilievre tried to bridge the gap.
Sort of. He argued for fighting climate change while expanding energy opportunities, looking for that balance between environment and economy, especially in the energy sector.
Mr. Carney's position.
He talked about fast-tracking approvals for pipelines and mining projects, and this is key while respecting indigenous consent, trying to thread that needle.
A difficult balance, and Monsieur Blanchet, still opposed to pipelines in Quebec.
Yes, reiterated that stance, even if opinions change elsewhere. But he also talked about north-south energy trade potential and Quebec's focus on clean energy, like lithium opportunities.
The debate also hit on oil and gas subsidies, right? Always contentious.
Always. And Poilievre directly attacked Carney's industrial carbon tax.
How did Carney defend it?
He argued a climate plan, including carbon pricing, is actually necessary for trade partnerships now, positioning climate action as economically vital.
Interesting angle. And Singh's response to all this?
He just doubled down on the urgency, criticized Carney on fossil fuel subsidies, criticized Poilievre on pollution, pushing for a much faster transition away from fossil fuels.
And Blanchet added a nuance about Alberta's oil.
Yeah, saying Quebec's issue isn't the oil itself, but the pollution from extraction and use, contrasting it with Quebec's clean energy focus.
Okay, leadership in a crisis. What came up there?
Some general statements, I can handle tough times, that sort of thing from everyone.
Standard political talk. Anything specific?
Mr. Carney mentioned using federal capital spending to drive private investment during crises, a specific tool he highlighted.
What about global crises? Ukraine.
Strong consensus there, actually. Both Polyev and Carney pledged continued support for Ukraine, even if U.S. support wavers.
And Polyev specifically mentioned Arctic defense again.
Yes, tying it into national security. On healthcare, Mr. Singh talked about negotiating funding deals with provinces, but with conditions attached.
More federal strings attached to health transfers?
That seemed to be the implication, seeking more accountability.
There was also an open forum part.
Right, where Blanchett asked Carney about governing in a minority, a very practical question.
And they touched briefly on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and its domestic impact.
Briefly, yes. And Polyev brought up immigration, specifically the Century Initiative from the previous government, raising concerns about infrastructure strain.
Then came the Leader's Choice segment, where they questioned each other.
Yeah, that got pretty direct. Singh questioned Carney's loyalty people versus corporations.
Blanchett pressed Carney on regional fairness Ontario auto sector versus Quebec lumber.
Polyev went after Carney's past advice to Justin Trudeau, continuing that linkage strategy.
And Carney challenged Polyev back on cutting the consumer carbon tax.
And Singh challenged Polyev on his proposed immigration levels. So those exchanges really sharpened the key differences.
And finally, the closing statements, their last pitch.
Their final messages to Canadians, yeah.
Okay, so after the debate, the analysts weighed in. What were the main takeaways from the post-debate commentary?
Well, a few things stood out. Analysts definitely noticed Mr. Carney trying to create distance from Justin Trudeau and the previous government.
Trying to establish his own brand.
Exactly. Mr. Singh was seen as having a particularly strong first half. And Monsieur Blanchett, apparently his tone and approach differed between the English and French debates.
Interesting. What else?
Poilievre's strategy of constantly tying Carney to Trudeau was definitely noted. And there was chatter about the NDP's confidence and supply deal. Did they get enough credit for what they achieved? That old question.
Right. Anything else notable about the format or fallout?
The inclusion of questions from non-traditional media was mentioned, and the Green Party's exclusion and their reaction to it got some airtime.
Did the analysts think the debate actually changed anything?
Mixed views, really. Some felt it might not sway many voters, citing maybe a lack of deep emotional connection. Strategic voting was seen as still a major factor.
So calculations over connection?
Perhaps. And lots of emphasis on the final week of the campaign and just a fundamental importance of getting out to vote.
Okay, now let's step back, put our deep dive hats firmly on. Looking at this 2025 debate through today's lens, there are some pretty big things missing, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. And for you listening, trying to gauge preparedness for the actual challenges Canada faces, these omissions are, well, they're quite striking.
Like the pandemic. I mean, it got barely a mention, right? Despite ongoing impacts like long COVID.
Exactly. It's kind of baffling in retrospect. We know even now how long COVID affects the workforce, the healthcare system. You look at the UK, physicians out of practice. Canada is facing similar things.
Yet it wasn't really a major topic for future leadership.
Apparently not. And related to that, almost no talk about improving things like ventilation standards, ASHRA 241, or the role of better masks like N95s in public health going forward. It just wasn't there.
AI, artificial intelligence.
Mentioned, yeah, but superficially. No deep dive into automation's impact, and that's huge, affecting knowledge work, creative jobs, blue-collar jobs, a massive transformation underway.
Just wasn't grapples with seriously.
No, and connecting these threads. The debate seemed to miss the bigger picture of accelerating interconnected systemic risks.
Like what?
Well, financial volatility, climate migration is a huge one, geopolitical instability. We're in this era of compounding crises, right? But the debate felt very linear, reactive, addressing issues one by one.
Not really tackling the exponential nature of the changes we're seeing.
Precisely. And other gaps, too. Not much depth on youth disillusionment or intergenerational fairness.
Which feels pretty central to long-term stability.
It does. And meaningful engagement with Indigenous leadership on things like land stewardship, sustainable energy, governance that felt limited to, vital perspectives largely sidelined.
And what about supply chains? After everything we've seen globally?
Barely a whisper. No real discussion on fragile global supply chains or, importantly, planning for regional resilience.
Which links directly to economic sovereignty, food production, national security.
All of it. As the source material we reviewed suggested, the debate felt anchored in, let's say, legacy thinking, not really future-ready strategies. The emissions are loud when you measure preparedness against what's actually coming.
Right. So for you, the listener wanting to be truly informed, looking back at this debate shows the leaders' positions, yes, but also significant blind spots in the conversation.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe a question for you to ponder. Given the incredible pace of change we see now globally, in public health, technology, climate stability, all interconnected, what crucial questions do you think leaders really should be prioritizing in these kinds of high-stakes discussions?
What was missing for you? Something to think about as you keep track of these vital issues and, form your own informed opinions.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.